I'm Adam Richards and I'm out today on the beautiful River Swale around Morton. I'm testing out some final prototypes of some new float rods that we're going to be adding to the Sphere range. These rods are going to be aimed primarily at river fishing, so this is the perfect venue to try them. I'm catching some big hard fighting chub, and as well as talking you through the rods and all their features, I'm also going to give you my top 5 tips on catching big river chub. Like this beauty. Right, my first tip for catching these chub on little shallow rivers like this is don't be too keen to get fishing. We all get to our peg and you just want to get fishing straight away. But the fish in these places are spooky and you can often see them moving about in your peg. So what I like to do is get to my peg and I'll just sit here for half an hour, perhaps even longer sometimes, just loose feeding some bait. Get them fish confident and it'll make them much easier to catch at the start of the session. There's lots of fish there, they're competing for your bait, and they're going to throw caution to the wind a little bit and just make it that little bit easier for you. Right, so I've already spoke about feeding your peg before the start, not being too keen to get fishing. Now another important thing is where to feed your bait. Obviously, you can come to your peg, just fire some bait in front of you and fish, but if you put a little bit more thought into it than that, you can really benefit from it. On these type of venues, and especially with chub, they'll often come right up your peg and sit underneath your loose feed. Now, if you loose feed in front of yourself, you really struggle to get your rig in and fishing by the time it gets to where the fish are sat. So for me, on this type of venue where it is only shallow, it's key to try and feed your bait downstream. So I might feed 5 yards downstream, might feed 10 yards downstream, just however far down it is that I feel I can get my rig under control and fishing correctly by the time it reaches where them fish are sat. So today I'm feeding maybe 6 or 7 yards down my peg. I can cast my float in slightly above that, and by the time I've mended my line, fed a little bit of bait, I can just get that float running through nicely as it gets to where the fish are sat. And that way, by the time I get my bait to the fish, I'm presenting it just how I want, nice and natural, and it gives me a much better chance of hooking one. Right, something's happening now today that happens quite regularly on these shallow, clear rivers. And I can actually see the chub feeding on my bait, and as my float gets to them, you can see them spooking away. Now, it's quite regular on these type of rivers, and there's a couple of ways to combat it. The first is what I'm doing at the minute. You see my waggler there? Set around 6 foot deep, maybe a little bit more. Now, obviously that's well over depth. The peg's only 18 inches deep. But what happens there is the float goes through your peg and your hook bait's a long way behind it, dragging along the bottom. So any fish that are spooking off your float can then recongregate in your peg and your hook bait's still dragging through. Now, to achieve this, I've got basically what's a small pellet waggler on. I've cut it down to suit the depth. It's around 2 inches long, and I can undershot it a little bit, meaning I can drag line on the bottom and my float doesn't drag under. So that's been very good today. I've caught a lot of fish doing it. The other way you can do it is to fish a stick float, and by fishing a stick float, again 4 or 5 feet deep, you can hold onto the float really hard, meaning your float goes through and your hook bait will be here, well ahead of it. And that can just trick them few extra fish that are a bit frightened of your float, and you can either get your hook bait to reach them with a stick float before your float, or with a waggler well over depth and it dragging behind it. So give that a try, and I'm sure it'll help you catch a few extra fish. Right, I've already spoken about feeding your bait downstream of yourself so you can get your rig in and fishing before you get to it. Another thing that I think is important about where you feed your bait is not to feed too far across the river. Obviously you can see all the trees lining the far bank, it looks absolutely beautiful, and the fish do live under them. But the problem is, if you start firing your bait to the trees, and some bits are obviously going to drift underneath, and the chub then have no reason whatsoever to come out. So I always like to start feeding between halfway and 2/3 of the way across to the trees. So I'll give myself plenty of room so my bait's not going in the trees and the fish have got to come out for it. And then you've also got the added bonus that they're a little bit easier to land. I mean, if you hook them right up against the tree line, they've got a good chance of getting under. If you hook them away from the tree line, then you're in control from the start. I think that's really important. You can always follow them across the river to the trees if you have to do, but if you start off down the middle, you're giving yourself the best chance of drawing them fish out of the snags. Right, just want to quickly talk about bait choice. Now for me, for chub fishing, there's two choices really. Maggots and casters and hemp. Now, on a river like today, it's bright, the water's clear, fish can see everything. I like to feed casters and hemp then. Stand out in the clear water, they make a bit of noise when they go in, and the hemp will stick in the gravel a little bit, which if there's any barbel coming your peg is a great thing. It gives them something to grub about on and move around. Now, if we'd had a little bit of rain and there might have been a few more inches of water, a little bit of colour, then I changed to maggots. I'm not convinced casters and hemp stand out very well in the coloured water, whereas white or bronze maggots, the fish can see them coming and they'll chase them about. So that's really it for me. As far as feeding's concerned, maggots when it's coloured, hemp and casters when it's not. Hook baits, it's worth having a few big baits with you. Quite often, especially in low clear conditions, you can see fish feeding on your bait and you can't catch them. Running through with a big piece of bread on can be good. Pieces of meat, lobworms, anything like that. Just something that stands out over your feed, you can run down and it can pick off an extra fish or two. I just want to quickly talk about float choice. Picking the right float is obviously vitally important. And one thing I see a lot is people trying to use a float that's too light. So one thing I try to do is always use a float that's heavy enough so I'm always in control of it. The last thing you want is the river controlling how your float goes through. You want to be able to slow it down and get it to go through the peg exactly how you want. The only way you can do that is by having enough weight down the line. So obviously you can't go ridiculously heavy. It's 18 inches deep here. You couldn't go and fish a big 2 gram Avon. But likewise, you probably could fish with, I've used these shallow water sticks today. You could probably use one in a 2 number 4 and fish with it. But having total control over that wouldn't have been so easy. So I've just upped it slightly and I fished a 4 number 4. I'd rather use a float slightly heavier than what I need rather than slightly lighter. So you have got that control all the time. And I really do like these shallow water sticks. They've got a nice thick top. I can see them a long way down my peg. And with a short length, they're also suited to this shallow water. There's also the same thing here, but it's got a bit of a shoulder, thinner tip, just a bit more sensitive if I wasn't fishing for such big fish. But the key point is make sure there's enough weight down the line that you're in control. The other thing is, this is where the 15.5 foot rod comes in. By having a long rod, the tip of your rod is closer to where your float's going down the river, which again just helps you keep it under control and the float going in a straight line rather than coming back towards you and going down the river naturally. So that's my main tip for floats. Just make sure you're in control of the float all the time. If you're not, just put a bigger float on, a little bit more shot, and just make things easier for yourself. So I've had a great day today on the River Swale. Weather's been fantastic. I've caught some nice big chub, but unfortunately I've run out of bait. So now it's time to pack up. But what I want to do before I pack up is just run you through the rods I've used today. Now, these are a final prototype of some rods to be added to the famous Sphere range for the 2018. These are now in production and should be available towards the end of 2017, so keep your eyes peeled. But what they are is 2 float rods and they're aimed towards river fishing. So we've got a 13.5 foot rod, which I've got in my hand here. That's perfect for when you're sort of fishing off the end of your rod on a small river with a stick float, for waggler fishing on a river like I am today, a little bit wider. The 15.5 foot version's perfect for fishing stick floats, bollos, any top and bottom float. So, like I said, these are specifically designed for river fishing, and what we've done is produced a rod that's got a lovely crisp action, which really helps when you're mending the line, picking your line up off the surface, and just keeping control of that float all the way down your peg. It also adds plenty of backbone, so when you're hooking hard fighting chub like I've caught today, up to £5, you'll have no problems whatsoever. Now, incorporated into the rod, we've also got a splice tip. What that does is allows you to still fish with light lines and catch small fish despite the crisp rod. That's lovely and forgiving and nice and soft. We've got the ergonomic handle, which we have on all of our rods in the Sphere range. That's a dream to fish with, sits under your elbow lovely, nice and comfortable, allowing you to just fish all day. So ever since we started with the Sphere range, we've known that this carbon will be fantastic for float rods. It's so light that you can hold your rod all day without any problems whatsoever. And when combined with one of our Sphere reels, which are also lovely and light with the magnesium frames, it's just a joy to use. You can fish all day, you can have the rod in the air holding your line off the water, feeding it off the spool, and they're just so comfortable. So alongside this, we've also got another rod to add to the range in 2018, and that's going to be a braid feeder rod. That feeder rod will come in one length only, it'll be 12 foot, which we've found is around about the ideal length for a lot of feeder fishing situations, many people's preference, so that's the length we've gone for. Again, it should be available towards the end of 2017. So if you keep your eye out for the new catalogue coming around October, November this year, these rods will be in it, along with all our other products. If you've got any questions, then just log on to Facebook and go to Brown & Fishing UK and we'll be happy to answer them.